please visit my website, programtokill.net. Go to plans and prices for even more exclusive information. You can also support me now on Patreon. Add me on TikTok. And leave a like and comment.
From the previous chapter 35 on Belgium, recall the persecuted to death anti-abuse NGO leader Marcel Vervloesem's uncovering of the Dutch Zandvoort file containing an enormous child porn collection and the alleged snuff film made aboard the murdered German porn king Gary, Ulrich's boat Apollo, and the abducted 12-year-old boy Manuel Schadwald, missing from Berlin. Before the system killed him, during a radio interview, Marcel Vervloesem corroborated earlier sources that the VIP on board the Apollo when Manuel was snuffed was none other than Joris Demmink. Keep in mind that Zandvoort, Wonderland, and the Rolodex scandals were all breaking stories during that same eventful pedo year of 1998, a mere 2 years after the Dutroux bombshell erupted in Belgium. Prior to the massive quad cover-ups, initially the breadcrumb trail led to Demmink being investigated as the potential headliner in virtually all four. Incidentally, also in April 1998, the NCRV's television program Network broadcast a police wiretap conversation between the Rotterdam boy brothel owner, child trafficker from Germany Lothar Glandorf, and a Dutch government official named Joris, not Demmink, but apparently another Joris named Franken, a senior policy officer at the Dutch Ministry of Health, Welfare, and Sport. The interdicted dialogue had to do with Franken consulting his boy orders with Glandorf, specifically involving the Dutch senior civil servant returning from a trip to Poland, crossing back into Holland at the German border in clandestine company with the trafficked boy. The evidence was used to prosecute both criminals, Glandorf receiving a 5.5-year prison sentence while the ministerial official quietly got off jail free with only 6 months probation and 240 hours community service, just to save the Dutch government a little embarrassment during an already scandalous pedo year in Europe. See how discreetly lax the Dutch justice system is when it comes to pedo trafficking and protecting their own? With all the rumored accusations flying around, the aired NCRV program apparently had wrongly implied that the man named Joris high up in the Dutch government was Demmink. Ultimately, Joris Franken not only got a gentle hand slap as his punishment, he also got to keep his upstanding government career intact till his honorable 2010 retirement. His protective boss from 1994 to 2002, Health Minister Elst Borst, who served as Deputy Prime Minister from 1998 to 2002, was ultimately murdered in her home in February 2014 at age 81. Her murderer, Bart van Yu, confessed his motive for killing Borst, her responsibility as Health Minister for enacting the Dutch euthanasia law in 2001. A year after killing the high-profile politician, the apparently untreated psychiatric patient reportedly murdered his own sister for offering him a cookie that, according to him, she knew he didn't like, culminating in his pathological mind a life of her bullying him, leading to her violent stabbing death as well, and in March 2017, Bart's 8-year prison sentence. A mere month after Demmink's own November 2012 retirement as head of the Dutch Justice Department, it was reported that during an earlier off-the-record conversation with 2 Dutch magazines, Gaykrant and Panorama, Joris Demmink admitted to having sex with young gay boys and that he did not always ask their age. It was audio recorded and is still posted in Dutch language at the website www.demmink.nl, which means Demmink Cover-Up, an excellent site holding ample evidence cataloging Joris Demmink's protracted pedophilic crime spree, remaining a never-indicted free man after 10 years in charge of all legal cases in Holland, and essentially admitting to sexually assaulting multiple minors. His in-our-face, over-the-top hubris and psychopathy appear boundless. In April 2014, former MP and editor of the gay newspaper Gaykrant, Henk Krol, testified at a hearing in Utrecht Civil Court in a lawsuit initiated by the De Rostige Spijker, Rusty Nail Foundation, clarifying whether the persistent allegations hanging over Joris Demmink the past few decades held any merit or not. During the initial preliminary witness examination phase, The foundation was able to gather considerable incriminating testimony from former police detectives and justice officials that the Dutch government engaged in subversion and obstruction of justice. Again, under oath, detectives Broersma, De Coder, and Hoek all confirmed that Demmink, Jan Wolter, Rabeke, Hans Holtuis, Henk Woldrik, and other significant figures within the Justice Department in 1998 were all considered viable suspects. It was Henk Krol who in 2003 solicited feedback from parkgoers at Anne Frank Plant Zone in Eindhoven, confirming that Demmink was a frequent park guest picking up young boys. Krol explained that the minister's government pass had even been carelessly left behind in the grass, as further indication of the more than strong likelihood he'd been trolling there hours earlier. Krol even traveled to Prague in the Czech Republic, where a doorman and a driver both confirmed that Demmink was a frequent guest at a particular sex club with underage boys, showing up in an officially dispatched government car from the embassy, catering to the perversions of yet more Joris sex tourism playtime indulgence. Additionally, through Demmink's likely murdered driver Rob Mostert, the powerful Dutchman who enjoyed his sex tourism holidays abroad in Turkey and Prague, reportedly knew British criminal Warwick Spinks, who made his fugitive residence permanently in Prague once it grew too dicey for him in Amsterdam. Besides Demmink, Henk Krol also spoke in court of another suspect in the Rolodex investigation, Jan Wolter Wabeke, the chief public prosecutor in Breda in 1998, a gay lawyer and judge who proudly calls himself the architect of same-sex marriage in the Netherlands, the first nation to pass such a law. Though the notorious leak in the 1998 police probe prematurely aborted the investigation years earlier, with suspicions never fully substantiated, legally, they were never lifted either, which technically renders Wabeke, Demmink, Holthuis, and the others named as still suspects. Like Demmink, allegations of raping underage children haven't hurt Wabeke's career path either, who went on to become an appeals court judge in The Hague for 8 years until 2010. During the late 1980s, Wabeke and his homosexual friends formed an ad hoc coalition that culminated in the 2001 same-sex marriage law. Henk Krol was part of Wabeke's coalition and disclosed during his testimony in April 2014 that Wabeke had shown Henk a homosexual porn video entitled Das Fickende Klassenzimmer, the fucking classroom, given to him as a gift from Joris Demmink. The star of the film was Demmink's now former long-term boyfriend, Czech actor Libor Kontrátlik. The head of the Dutch Justice Ministry was gushingly proud of his very young strapping stud boyfriend's leading role performance in the sleaze film set in a school classroom with underage schoolboys. Krol conveyed in court that Wabeke intended to share the video with him and pass it on. According to an anti-child abuse organization, Gezen in Gevaar, the photos from the film on the internet leave little doubt that the film has an unequivocal pedophile nature. It is about homosexual acts with adolescent schoolboys. Rolodex investigative detective Job Hoek had this to say about Demmink's prized boyfriend's flick. There are clips here of boys who are definitely not 18 years old, but I can't say if they are 14 or 12 years old. Regardless, the legal ramifications of clearly hiring underage boys as actors in a child porn flick is serious violation of the law, but to have it then be proudly passed around among the highest members of the nation's judiciary is totally disgusting, not to mention a crime in and of itself, illustrating the sickest mindset of absolutely deranged psychopathic predators currently running and ruining our planet. Once it was released that, under oath, that witness Krol outed Wabeke and others, the board of the Court of Appeal in The Hague came out with the following statement. According to a witness, the board understands from the media, the police had in 1997 indications that 3 chief public prosecutors, including Wabeke, were involved in the sexual abuse of underage boys. Based on the above statement, one would automatically assume that announcing a formal investigation would come next. Think again, we're talking about a nation that prides itself on its progressive, anything-goes worldview. The mere fact that a negative statement about a member of the judiciary comes into the public domain cannot be a reason to question his position. Despite the negative statement being child rape coming from a professional law enforcement officer or MP based on concrete incriminating evidence that made the judge a suspect not only to police, but Amsterdam's chief prosecutor's office as well. And so it goes, forever protecting their own. Speaking of which, less than a month prior to Joris Demmink's retirement, on October 4, 2012, a hearing in Washington, D.C., entitled Listening to Victims of Child Sex Trafficking in the Netherlands, was sponsored by the U.S. Helsinki Committee for Human Rights. A December 2012 UPI article specifies, USHC Chairman Chris Smith, RNJ, testified that Joris Demmink, Secretary General of the Dutch Ministry of Security and Justice, has been accused by witnesses in Amsterdam and Turkey of pedophilia with boys aged 11-15. Rep. Smith even proposed a resolution in U.S. Congress to move the UN's International Court of Justice from The Hague because The Hague, as the seat of the Dutch national government, demonstrated nothing but commitment to protecting the pedophile in charge of its own justice system, avoiding all accountability for his litany of child rape crimes. Panelists at the congressional hearing presenting evidence against Demmink about rampant Dutch pedophilia included a victim witness, an attorney representing both Turkish and Dutch victims, and aforementioned former CID chief Claus Langendonn, who investigated Demmink's child rape allegations and concluded the Justice Secretary General was wrongly never brought to justice. No surprise that these particular panelists would speak out against pedophilia perpetrated by their national leader in charge of the Dutch justice system. But a visit to the website of the Netherlands Helsinki Commission, NHC, and its About Us page incredibly displays as one of its sitting members on its executive committee the country's most accused pedophile in history, Joris Demmink. Granted the position of investigating himself both in his own Justice Department and NHC, no wonder he has escaped justice for decades as supreme gatekeeper in charge of protecting not only himself, but his entire nation's infested pedophilia cesspool. Of course, it never hurts to be chums rubbing shoulders with criminal planetary overlords like perennial Bilderbergers and the Dutch inner club of Minerva Society members that includes Holland's former queen and current king, their pedo friends Salomonson, Hammerstein, and Schimmelpenninck, along with virtually all the justice ministers. Given such unlimited power to both abuse and be protected, the now 72-year-old Demmink remains forever out of reach, living out his golden years with never a worry of ever having to answer for his alleged sexual assault crimes. In retirement, he sits on the advisory board of EM, Majors Institute and Law Faculty at his alma mater, Leiden University. Hans Holtuis, the one-time DA and fellow child abuse suspect that Holland's top cop allegedly leaked the Rolodex investigation, also with never a worry over his past sodomizing underage boys, comfortably serves on the Leiden faculty's advisory board. As a footnote of momentary inconvenience, Joris Demmink was once finally required to show up in a courtroom and briefly take the witness stand for all of 20 minutes in early June 2016 in that mock trial civil suit. Of course, he flatly denied all accusations and walked out 20 minutes later untouched and unscathed. The media coverage sparsely failed to even disclose the lawsuit outcome. The criminal complaint that began in 2014 against Demmink ultimately found its way to the Arnhem-Leeuwarden Court of Appeals, whereupon 3 years later, on August 18, 2017, it proclaimed the outright falsehood. A very extensive and thorough investigation has taken place, with no stone left on top of the other. In so many words, how many times have we heard no stone unturned followed by justice denied? The whitewashed final verdict. The investigation has convincingly shown that there are only speculations and assumptions with regard to the suspicions that have arisen. There is no evidence that Demmink was in Turkey in the years 1995, 1996, and/or 1997. Also, on the basis of all the findings in this investigation, it is highly unlikely that the later judgmental criminal judge would be able to come to evidence of rape on the basis of the present report, nor would it be established that it was Demmink who was responsible for that fact. Is responsible. So there you have it, another 3-year phony deliberation rigged from the outset that Demmink would walk, confirming that he and his Dutch VIP pedophilia slate were completely wiped clean by standard cover-up protocol, as always. Demmink remains above the law to this day because as a member of the inner club, he holds the dirty goods on international royalty as well as heads of church and state. As long as the Luciferian Insiders Global Pedo Alliance and Mutual Self-Preservation Pact of Silence remains as tightly sealed as it ever was, this pathetic sad story ending will always remain shamefully the same. While the powerful guilty never fail to go free, the opposite fate always awaits victims and truth tellers. In every single pedophilia cover-up around the globe, those who seek to expose the child's sex crimes do so at their own peril. Countless numbers are murdered for knowing too much, others are targeted with character assassination, nonstop ridicule and harassment by court litigation and media attacks, resulting in damaging retribution and forced imprisonment in the criminal or mental health system. The chronically debilitating effects of child sexual abuse make victims easy vulnerable prey as both children and adults if they live that long. With no justice coming, the more vocal victims become, speaking out against their powerful perps, the more punishment they receive over and above their devastating original abuse. If they are persistent enough, the corrupt system possesses a myriad of ways of removing them as threats, simply by labeling them mentally ill, safely discarding them behind insane asylum walls, overly sedated into oblivion so they cannot talk or function, or worse yet, murdered by unsolved crimes to appear as accidents or natural causes, as well as quietly murdered by euthanasia laws. This method of destroying potential threats is becoming more viable with more nation-states passing euthanasia laws. Leave it to Holland to again be the world's frontrunner in 2001. With every kind of gaslighting resource at their beck and call disposal, evil, powerful perpetrators can increasingly elect to misuse the mental health system and euthanasia as their convenient, lethal weapon of choice for neutralizing the more vulnerable potential threats, primarily the child abuse victims themselves. Case in point, in May 2015, the Daily Mail reported that the year before, a woman in her 20s who suffered severe chronic child sexual abuse from age 5 to 15 was put to sleep by the state in the always progressive Netherlands, disposed of by its loose application of its own 2001 euthanasia law. The doctors and psychiatrists decided the young woman's symptoms from post-traumatic stress disorder and depression were incurable and elected to kill her with their kindness in the form of a lethal injection, despite the woman making progress through intensive trauma therapy within the last 2 years of her life. Many suffering in the throes of depression may verbalize a desire to die as a means of escape from their torment and despair, frequently attempting suicide, but nearly as often as a desperate cry for help. Yet placing someone's life in danger out of a pretext of charitably putting them out of their misery through euthanasia legislation is a dangerous slippery slope, easily misused and abused by an oppressive state, granted legal license and excuse to willfully kill, fully sanctioned, aided and abetted by its own lethal laws, deceptively masked in sheep's clothing. Another case in the Netherlands in June 2019 involved sexual abuse victim Noah Pothoven, still a minor at only 17 years of age, who opted to end her life. She even wrote a book called Winning or Learning about her struggle coping with effects of sexual abuse, suffering from PTSD, depression, and anorexia. It was also a constructive critique of the mental health system. She had reached a point in her young life where the pain was too unbearable to continue. Her last post on social media being, "I have not really been alive for so long." At 16, she attempted to die through the Dutch euthanasia law, but the hospital refused without the consent of her parents. Her death was initially misreported as euthanasia, but it was suicide at home after she stopped eating and drinking. The takeaway here is how the universally broken mental health system failed her after her first sexual assault at age 11 followed at age 14 by 2 men raping her. She was not psychologically supported or prepared to formally report the crimes, so her assailants are still out there likely reoffending, and her caregivers were unaware of her abuse until years later. Stuck on waiting lists of so few treatment centers adequately suited to address the complexities of sexual trauma, an eating disorder, and major depression, Noah was shuffled from one acute inpatient hospitalization after the next, up to 23 different institutions between 20 and 33 times. At one point, she was kept in isolation for months against her will, and another sent to a facility that treated youth with behavior disorders among boys prone to violence, re-traumatizing her and exacerbating her anorexic symptoms that went untreated. All the wrong interventions at the wrong institutions with limited treatment focus only caused her illness to spiral out of control. Both her autobiography and life courageously confront the systemic gross failures and mental health crisis plaguing this troubled world, especially meeting the acute psychological needs of sexual trauma victims prone to multiple disorders and symptoms. A dire reflection of this thoroughly broken system amidst the digital age of social media is the fact that the adolescent depression and suicide rates have soared over 60% and 56% higher, respectively, from 2009 to 2017 in the US alone, with a parallel trend worldwide. Noah is a case in point of how victims of child sexual abuse, regardless of nation or system, be it mental health or legal system, are totally inadequate in providing the necessary care and support to facilitate a viable pathway to healing and health. Historically, the system has viewed abuse victims, especially from the care system, as a throwaway population the world over. As a clinician who worked with young abuse victims for many years and had clients commit suicide, I always have mixed feelings regarding these kinds of tragic life and death situations. My therapeutic role was to provide unconditional support and awareness that reaffirms life and reduces clients' motivation to want to end it all, regardless of how bad they may feel at any given moment. If over an extended period, an adult over 18 becomes so overwhelmed by their crippling pain and debilitation that it increasingly becomes too much to bear after exhausting every available treatment option, and the client is still determined to exercise what little control they perceive they have over their life and still wish to die, in most nations, states and provinces therapists by law are mandated to make every effort to ensure the safety of those in their care no matter what. Required by law to keep a client safe from self-harm, when clinical judgment indicates clients may still be at risk of hurting themselves, therapists will generally err on the side of caution, even to the point of arranging involuntary hospitalization. Where euthanasia laws apply, I would never be willing to actively assist another person commit suicide. Therapists are mandated to do everything in their power to sustain human life. If and when a client beyond our control still chooses to commit suicide, it's devastating for loved ones as well as peer friendships, especially if it appeared to come out of the blue, though most often there are warning signs. As a therapist losing a recently former client and one current client in a career spanning over a quarter century, it was when I lost a client, and I can think of signs to keep that person alive at virtually all cost. Risk then sometimes involves only natural to struggle with a sense of guilt for not doing enough. But knowing I did everything in my power to help them, as sad as the tragic outcome always is, ultimately, I came to understand, realize and accept that it was their choice, and passing value judgment on them is not up to me nor others who never walked in their shoes. Stories like Noah's are today's abysmal reality where far too many fall through the ever-widening cracks of our shattered system. The lesson from her life is we desperately need drastic, major systemic change. Often the root of depression is the sense of powerlessness and lack of control to change one's life and circumstances. So in the end, suicide may end up what they view as their only choice still available that they do exercise control over. Unfortunately, Noah's horrendous experience within the mental health system left her feeling she had no other choice. Regarding the 2014 euthanasia case of the Dutch woman in her 20s, in my years as a mental health clinician, I can attest that if unscrupulous psychiatrists through big pharma over-medication wish to turn their victimized patients into zombies, they can easily get away with doing that and more simply by abusing existing mercy-killing laws through nefarious manipulation and coercion of incapacitated victims signing their own death warrants on a readily available dotted line. Thus, under existing laws, legal murder by the books may be common enough, especially if targeted as a threat by prominent sexual predators posing as pillars of society who readily, psychopathically resort to murder in order to silence or eliminate their victims. It happens way more than we will ever know, and through liberalized euthanasia legislation passed in recent decades in the more progressive nation-states under pretense of compassionate, humane, and merciful care, child rapists and their enablers with medical collusion easily become murderers of child victims because they can legally get away with it. Here's a bizarre, mind-bending irony. The 2014 euthanized murder of a mentally and emotionally impaired sexual abuse victim by the Dutch medical legal system could have been the source of twisted inspiration that motivated Bart van U to stab to death Holland's former health minister Els Borst, the one person most responsible for shepherding through his nation's euthanasia law, as his publicly stated prime motive for murdering her. As in Belgium, North Wales, the BBC, and the Nebraska Franklin scandals, the cabal mafia will readily resort to neutralizing many potential threats by assassination, with the Dutch pedo-scandal no different. Already mentioned are the premature, suspicious deaths of disgusted government driver Rob Mostert. Tired of watching Demmink do his damage in the back seat, he turned the predator into police only to suddenly be attacked by a fatal heart attack at only age 50. His wife didn't offer additional information except to say she was paid off by the Justice Ministry, seemingly a hush-money bribe from Demmink himself. Then the early sudden death of 41-year-old Turkish prosecutor Murat Gök, working diligently on putting the child rapist away, but the overriding shady deal between the Turkish and Dutch governments got in his way. Then there was the abduction snuff film murder of 13-year-old German boy Manuel Schadwald, with Demmink allegedly present at his crime scene death. Little British Madeleine McCann, who disappeared in Portugal in May 2007, was allegedly sighted just days later in Amsterdam prior to her suspected murder, with a German sex offender now under investigation as the prime suspect. As is standard in all pedo scandals, a large number of abrupt, highly questionable tragic endings come to those either associated with or determined to bust this Dutch pedo-narco trafficking operation. There's the extremely bizarre, corrupt case mired in decades of cover-up of an underage boy turned alleged serial killer, sexually abused, aided and abetted by the Hague Court Vice President, conniving pedo judge Cornelis Stolk, who died at age 87 in 2004. The infamous Dutch serial killer Koos Hertogs allegedly murdered 12-year-old and 18-year-old girls in 1979 and an 11-year-old in 1980 before being apprehended and put away for life in 1982. The same year, Joris Demmink switched from Defense Ministry employment to the Justice Department. According to Koos Hertogs, right after the first murder in 1979, Judge Stolk sent in his wife and confidant Leon Latour, posing as a psychiatrist to befriend Hertogs, no doubt to monitor and keep an eye on him. Though his wife was not a psychiatrist, she actually had been a KLM flight attendant turned first female pilot for the Royal KLM family during the 1950s. Stolk's first wife reportedly committed suicide, perhaps realizing she married a pedo judge. Based on separate independent research by both author-psychologist Patrick Oomans as well as TV crime reporter Peter R. de Vries, Hertogs is alleged to have been sexually abused as a minor by prominent High Court Judge Stolk. De Vries estimates that sexual relations went on for about 12 years. When Koos became involved in petty crimes, the judge literally bailed him out, using his influence to keep his young stud out of jail after alleged armed robbery, paying for his driver education so he'd stop getting cited for driving without a license. The ploy to have the judge's second wife masquerading as a psychiatrist to intercede on Stolk's behalf was intended to keep Koos, and hence the judge, out of trouble. The judge's feeble attempt, feigning a sense of altruism that motivated him to take on the charity case of not allowing a good boy to go bad, was a deceptive front to cover his own lecherous ass. Despite Hertog's private disclosures, his diary entries and letters written by Stolk, all confiscated by prison authorities, indicating a long-term homosexual relationship, the judge was desperate to cover up his sexual liability by any means necessary, perhaps even framing his exploited, scapegoated serial killer. It turns out that the only reason Hertogs ever even admitted to killing the girls, which he held off till 1989, was to qualify for a possible early release allegedly offered by the state as long as he stayed quiet. Koos Hertogs freely admitted to abducting and sexually abusing the three victims, but later retracted his homicidal confession after realizing he may never see freedom again, insisting that other accomplices actually killed the girls, naming Judge Stolk as the murderer of the first victim, Tialda Vissar, maintaining that Stolk electrocuted Tialda in Koos's home in The Hague, likely in the attic where a makeshift torture chamber, not unlike Dutroux's dungeon and Salomonson's cellar, existed, further imparting a common connection between the three. Patrick Oomans concluded that Hertogs did not fit the profile of a serial killer, alluding to the judge and a larger criminal network. At the time of Hertog's July 2015 death, the 65-year-old inmate had been the longest-serving criminal in Holland. Several months prior to Koos dying, a 2015 book was published entitled Police, Justice, and the Case Koos H. His story insisting that he never killed the girls. Montenegrin Slobodan Mitric, aka Karate Bob, fashioned himself the Yugoslav James Bond as an apparent hired gun security agent assassinating targeted enemies of the state. While still in his mid-20s, he moved to Amsterdam in 1973 and never left till his death at 68 in 2016. Meanwhile, As the Iron Curtain grip let up in his home nation, it backslid into political chaos amidst a NATO-led war leading to balkanization. Maarten did some serious prison time in Holland for killing 3 government-targeted Serbs, sentenced to 13 years in a Dutch prison. In 1974, Slobodan got to know Koos Hertogs as another fellow soldier of fortune outcast. Maarten's mercenary services were hired by a Gladio-like Dutch network led by the close friend of Prince Bernhard, Hans Tings Gerritsen. While in prison between his covert assignments, Maarten began writing novels about his craft operating in dangerous espionage missions. Passages from one of his nonfiction books entitled Netherlands Mafia revealed that Koos was framed for the child murders, and when Maarten came to his friend's defense, he was threatened with more imprisonment. From Karate Bob's book, children were ordered to be brought to wealthy and influential customers. Some were even ministers. If a girl threatened to talk, she was murdered. If the real truth comes up, I think the Netherlands will fall apart. This was the exact same scenario as the Belgian pedo operation. Maarten stated that he knew of 20 young girls who were raped, tortured, and assassinated. For his part, throughout the 1980s, trying to set the record straight, Slobodan dared to file a police statement in Drenthe. To silence him, the state quickly gagged and charged Maarten with raping prostitutes and wives of top criminals. About Koos, he wrote, "A deal was made with Koos Hertogs. If he kept his mouth shut, he would be released earlier. Koos was but a small pawn in the whole game." Similar to Dutroux, except perhaps not a killer. But the parallels are strikingly similar between the lethal pedo operation in both Belgium and Holland. To prevent Hertogs from making trouble for the VIP pedophiles, despite keeping quiet, the state reneged on its promise, never releasing him. The Montenegrin went on. "Koos had told me everything in confidence before he was arrested. I told a lawyer in confidence which important person it was in charge, because I believed that mankind could not tolerate such a thing. After all, they were all innocent children abused by this dangerous pedophile gang and then murdered. That important person Slobodan Maarten refers to could possibly be Frits Salomonson, jointly protected to this day by the protected Lippens brothers and Low Country royalty. In response to Maarten informing authorities he was planning to disclose the truth in a novel, he was promptly sent to a psychiatric penitentiary. Slobodan said he would refrain from mentioning the pedo ringleader by name, but was transferred and placed in isolation at another prison anyway. The security services told him he'd be released as long as he stayed quiet. But when the state framed Koos, sentencing him to life in 1982, Maarten testified that Koos was innocent of the murder charges. This resulted in Maarten receiving brutal beatings by police and an actual death threat from Attorney General H.R.G. Faber. Slobodan Maarten exposed crime journalist Peter R. de Vries as a state agent and royal shill, and the cabal using Koos as a convenient scapegoat. As for Peter R. de Vries, he is a friend of those influential people who have also given him a great deal of money. His purpose is to shove all the blame and guilt in the shoes of Koos Hertogs. Koos is no darling, a very vulgar and slick security service man, worse than any real criminal. But he has served enough time in jail for his part in this whole affair. I think they want to make him disappear from this world forever, especially because the mafia has been blackmailing the top figure in this affair for years, and they no longer need Koos Hertogs. It would be a shame because Koos knows too much. You Dutch should really be ashamed of yourselves. All the trash in this world in the last 30 years comes from your corrupt secret services. Hertogs was the criminal cabal's fall guy and patsy, serving his last 35 years behind bars till 2015 for murders he most likely did not commit. Only a year later, death overtook Slobodan Maarten as well. Meanwhile, the guilty always remain free, to quote a David Byrne song lyric, same as it ever was. More cases of egregious injustice through the most probable assassination. Dutch pediatrician Dr. Joyce Le Bruyere, through her family physician practice, stumbled upon abused children. As she was among the first to begin unearthing the powerful network operating in the Netherlands, one night on her way to her parents, she suddenly disappeared around February 2020, 1991. Several weeks later, on March 17, she was found nude, lifelessly floating in a lake, no longer weighed down by basalt, reportedly murdered to shut her up from revealing what she'd come to know. At the time of her death, Joyce was estranged from her spouse and in the process of obtaining a divorce. Former child prostitute Frank Lenders provided evidence against Joris Demmink with journalist Fred de Brouwer for Panorama, who died mysteriously in Chonburi, Thailand. Brouwer had written early articles outing Demmink as a child sexual predator as early as 2003. Fearing for his life, he moved to Thailand where, while riding his scooter, he was chased and run down by a white car, dying at the age of 58 in 2014. Meanwhile, in 2009, Lender's lawyer, Gerard Hamer, at just 54 years old, while riding his bicycle a short distance home from his office, abruptly keeled over from a supposed heart attack. Coincidence? Probably not. Is it any wonder Lenders flip-flopped some of his allegations towards the dangerous justice minister? We've seen this same kind of murderous skullduggery in Belgium, and all scandals where high-profile pedophiles are threatened with exposure. Attorney Wilfried Brinkhuis arranged sex parties in Utrecht exclusively for adults only, but was allegedly approached by senior officials representing the pedo-network, pressuring Brinkhuis to expand his services to include children. Wilfried drew the line with kids and contacted public prosecution services. He was dead before his 47th birthday, reportedly murdered. Labour politician in the Dutch parliament, Maarten van Traa, led the controversial Van Traa Commission investigating the police and judicial investigators in the IRT drug scandal, and was believed by some to have been killed in a car accident at age 52, just months after the commission report was released in 1997. Speculation that his vehicle had been tampered with after becoming obsessed with digging too deep into organized crime, even after his inquiry had officially ended, and exposing the collusive unholy marriage between Dutch government, the royal family, and organized crime likely led to his self-undoing. Yet another murder victim who spoke out of school was longtime druggie gangster Charlie Wong, fingering Salomonson's Texlite company for its money laundering. Wong knew the underworld biz but was in tight with higher-ups in the legal, media, and business worlds as well. Figuring he was well enough connected to impart incriminating information about Salomonson by virtue of Frits' protection from royalty, it was Charlie who disappeared in 1993 with his body found months later in the woods. The first acknowledged political assassination in over 400 years of Dutch history was that of flamboyant, gay, anti-immigration populist politician Pim Fortuyn in 2002, just 9 days ahead of what would have been his victorious election as prime minister. Despite his demonization by the Dutch press, not unlike Trump, Pim was the voice reflecting the will of the people. The pedo-crime establishment cabal was not about to have the people's voice represented by a top national government leader, same response to JFK. It turns out that his assassin Volkert van der Graaf, an alleged radical animal activist environmentalist already freed from prison by 2014, allegedly wanting to protect Muslims, was actually financed by the Rockefeller Orange royal family Bilderberg Soros NGO cabal. Fortuyn's attorney was none other than the royal mafia-linked cabal player Oscar Hammerstein, Frits Salomonson's buddy. Nothing is as it seems at surface appearance, distorted by mainstream media lies based on what the crime cabal wants you to swallow and accept. When the same powerful suspects keep showing up, the truth becomes readily apparent. It's always about the underlying hidden power grab agenda, usurping authoritarian tyranny, promoting centralized, monopolistic, technocratic control. Thus, any populist anti-NWO leader would upset the crime cabal's apple cart and never be allowed. According to cabal rules, all major threats must be ruthlessly, violently rooted out and vanquished. When the Dutch Court of Appeals decided to investigate the evidence against Joris Demmink in 2014, the case was chaired by Judge Rob van den Heuvel. However, in March 2017, a freak boating accident was allegedly caused by a wave created by a passing cargo ship, apparently upending the rowboat carrying Rob and his fellow rower who also died. It was never properly explained because it was most likely not an accident at all, not when the fate of Joris Demmink's possible prosecution was hanging in the balance. Judge van den Heuvel was judicially replaced by the state's sure hands Henk Abink to bogusly close the case out. Just like the infamous Clinton body count, the Demmink saga continues. The most common means within the cabal's arsenal for silencing, neutralizing unwanted truth-tellers is legal harassment through unending court litigation and imprisonment. A lesser-known, covert, reprehensible method increasingly misused without oversight in the 21st century is bombarding victims with non-stop electronic terrorism in the form of psychotronic weaponry. The weapon used against the most visible, relentless, chosen target determined to expose longtime accused pedophile Joris Demmink and the elite's larger pedo network is anti-New World Order activist and one-time journalist Micah Cat, who has spent well over a decade in and out of courtrooms and jails, oft gagged, driven into exile, and thoroughly persecuted for all his efforts to bring justice to victims and perpetrators alike. After years of aborted Demmink investigations, Cat took it upon himself to boldly write "Danger, Pedophile" in Dutch language on Joris Demmink's home. Micah Cat's flamboyant persona has provided more than enough ammo for the crime cabal enemy to utilize against him, smearing his name, credibility, and reputation into the mud at every turn. In stark contrast, while guilty evil ones never fail to remain fully insulated and protected, living like gods above the law till death do them part, typically victims and truth-tellers are mercilessly raked over the coals until inevitably decommissioned and or destroyed, literally and or functionally. At 56 years of age now, the long-branded conspiracy theorist has been made a perennial laughingstock, either ridiculed or ignored by MSM. Yet the pesky Micha still manages to survive, currently living in Ireland. His unsilenced voice still sounds off daily on Twitter and at this blog. Astute geopolitical power structure analyst, Dutchman Jules van der Reyden, presents on his treasure trove of info website a compelling dot-connecting picture of the CIA Gladio Bilderberg Le Circle 1000 and One Club organized crime network linked to the Belgian-Dutch pedophilia web, teasing out the nuanced biases and opposing disinformation campaigns. But from my point of view, his lengthy piece on Demmink et al. Has the totality effect of clouding and obscuring the truth. Though I rarely disagree with his conclusions, as he tends to meticulously do his homework, spot on with highly detailed, well-documented, fine-tuned shades of gray on full display. But regarding his Demmink article, his multi-gray shades used to expose so much conflicting information, disinformation, and outright false rabbit holes lies that, IMHO, it feeds right into the guilty enemy camp modus operandi. That cabal's highly effective propaganda machine manifests through its never-ending barrage of false narratives, profusely peppered by a wide array of high-dosage shill disinfo and flat-out lies, thereby permitting the guilty as sin crime cabal to continue its crime spree unimpeded, successfully planting enough seed of doubt and confusion in the public to render them unable to know the truth. After reading and digesting Reyden's article on Demmink, I was similarly left with such a vague and confusing overall impression and conclusion that after all was said and done, as a reader I didn't know what to believe, coupled with a sense of exhausted futility at not arriving any closer to any discernible, actual solid truth, which of course is exactly the same outcome that the unindicted criminals in charge desire. Therefore, at risk of drawing an overly simplistic, closer to black and white as opposed to Joel's detail-laden gray conclusion, this writer still holds the black nobility aristocracy as the pedo overlords with their accomplice-controlled Dutch tentacles extended to heads of church and state, all the usual suspects linked by Lucifer's unlawful big business, child, drugs, arms, and money laundered trafficking that makes this blackmailed, extorted world go darkly round. Disinformation and conflicting contradictory evidence may blur a few facts, but the global reality of the pedo scourge, who's behind it and its universal cover-up, consistently remains the same across the planet's space-time continuum, regardless of the particular localized or national scandal. The reason? Because it's one globally interlocking network operation with centuries of practice keeping the masses blindly ignorant. After all, the elites are masters in both deception and murder. Whereas Joel Reyden leaves plenty of room for doubt that Joris Demmink is a hardcore serial pedophile, accused repeatedly over numerous decades, I believe Demmink is most definitely guilty as charged, but simply used his lofty gatekeeping clout atop the Justice Ministry to circumvent investigation, arrest, and prosecution, sitting in the driver's seat, getting head from the back seat, while holding blackmail dirt on the rest of the major network players. It's an old cabal trick in every scandal to single out one alleged pedophile, and then by concluding not enough evidence to prosecute, countless times repeated in Britain, despite throwing all the focus slings and arrows on the one lone pedo, it effectively misdirects public attention away from the other VIPs in the larger pedophilia network, in this case, Dutch royal family males, Frits Salomonson, Oscar Hammerstein, Rutger Schimmel-Pendink, politicians, and shadowy organized crime figures. Another strong indicator of Demmink and his cabal crimes are all the dead bodies posing threats to Demmink and company, as always, standard fare in every scandal. It's only the guilty who have the most to gain by murder, definitely not accusers who have everything including their lives to lose. Like Saville, Epstein, Lawrence King, Coach Sandusky, and Dutroux, on and on we go in every single chapter. This formulaic cabal game gets played out as a constant, always singling out one individual to pin the pedo tail on the designated donkey asshole as convenient sleight of hand methodology, escaping full network exposure. It's the same go-to bottom line reality and running theme throughout this entire monster of a book. The lone pedo gunman theory misapplied ad nauseum to intentionally obscure the horrific bigger picture. But this transparently feeble, worn-out attempt fails miserably to hide the glaring, blatant reality that all of it is, without exception, one interwoven planet-wide criminal cabal network, just different regional strands and tier levels belonging to the same satanically driven quacking duck. And with this massive child rape operation comes harvesting and trafficking of bodily organs and adrenochrome, weapons and drugs, legal and otherwise, along with perpetual war, poverty and growing austerity for the masses, all manifestations and profitable end products driven by the same diabolical global crime cabal engine. With each passing year, this disturbing truth has never been more apparent and in our face than in today's upside-down world of intentionally designed chaos and destruction. The internationalist robber barons of the late 19th, early 20th century industrial age, seamlessly morphing into the corporate oligarchs and NWO globalist molding, shaping and controlling the 21st century unfoldment always had, have their eye on the same endgame prize, their dystopian vision of one-world government tyranny. Fact. Throughout recorded history, a handful of black nobility bloodlines have retained power and control over virtually all structured earthly affairs for millenniums, all the while secretly practicing Kabbalistic occult blood sacrifice and sexual torture ritual of child victims. The scale of this powerful pedophilic network behind today's booming child sex trafficking trade has only grown exponentially as technological advances, amplified stealth, and continual public ignorance permit. The brazen controllers aren't even hiding their quest to depopulate the planet and gain absolute despotic control over every surviving organism still left. With so much irrefutable, more than solid evidence readily available nowadays, we as a human species can no longer afford to condone nor accept their rampant criminality, unspeakable acts of perverse cruelty, horror, and heinous destruction committed against our most defenseless, vulnerable population or our fast-dying planetary ecosystem. Denial, passivity, sense of impotence, and continued ignorance are no longer an excuse, not anymore. Since Germany is the most significant, dominant continental mainland player in both stature and power within the Euro crime cabal, it's the next stop on the pedophilia empire deep state pedophilia tour.